They had left him there to die, though no one on that road was brave enough to say it out loud. The horse was tied to a dead tree, his head hanging low, his body trembling beneath a sun so harsh it seemed to burn the silence itself. 3 travelers passed by, glanced at him and kept walking. Then Matteo, a poor woodcutter bent under a load of firewood, stopped. He had little water, little bread, and 5 children waiting at home. But that animal could not wait any longer. Matteo dropped the bundle of wood and moved toward him slowly, the way a man approaches someone who has already given up hope. The horse's eyes were clouded white, but his ears twitched when he heard Matteo's steps. The woodcutter looked at his nearly empty canteen. That water was supposed to get him home alive. Still, he knelt in the dust, wet his fingers, and held them near the cracked muzzle. "Drink, friend," he whispered. "I don't know who did this to you, but you won't die alone." The horse took only a few drops, then let out a weak sound so sorrowful that Matteo felt the desert answer. When he cut the rope, he froze. It was not old or frayed, it had been tied recently. Beside the tree, half buried in sand, a metal buckle flashed with the crest of a wealthy family. Matteo slipped it into his pocket, not yet understanding why his chest tightened. From that moment on, the rescue was no longer only mercy. It felt like a sign. Matteo was not a man who knew abundance. He lived in a mud and wood shack at the edge of town with his wife Inez and 5 children who had learned too young what it meant to sleep hungry. Each morning he left before dawn, climbed the hills with an axe on his shoulder, and came back bent beneath a bundle of firewood. He owned no cart, no mule, no hidden coins, only cracked hands, tired faith, and a kindness poverty had never managed to take. Much of that firewood ended up at Don Baltazar's hacienda, where the wealthy merchant spoke as if every poor man had been born to bow. When Matteo arrived, Baltazar made him wait with the load still on his back, counted the coins slowly, then dropped only a few onto the table. "That is all," he would say. "If you want more, work like a man." Matteo lowered his eyes, not from fear, but because his children mattered more than his pride. So when Matteo saw the buckle near the dead tree, he knew the symbol at once, Baltazar's golden falcon. His blood went cold. He could prove nothing, but the tightness in his chest told him that horse had not reached the desert by accident. Years earlier, Matteo had seen him in the merchant's stables, alone in a dark corner, head low, wrapped in a silence that hurt. Back then, he had done nothing. Now life was asking him to choose. The crest left no room for doubt. The horse belonged to Don Baltazar, the same merchant who bought Matteo's firewood and always paid less than it was worth. Everyone in town knew his wealth: caravans, full stables, fine cloth, and coins locked away in chests. But few knew that behind his walls lived an animal he blamed for an old loss. That horse was named Lucero, and once he had been the strongest of them all. Lucero had crossed mountains, dry riverbeds, and roads where other horses refused to move. For years he carried Baltazar's most valuable goods without failing once. But one afternoon, on a distant route, 2 sacks vanished from his back. No one knew if thieves, a storm, or fate had taken them. Baltazar never searched for the truth. From that day on, he no longer saw Lucero as a faithful servant, but as a living debt that still breathed. When Lucero grew old and his eyes went dark, Baltazar decided he no longer deserved shade or food. He ordered him taken out before dawn and left far away, where no one would see. "Let the desert finish what I refuse to feed," he said coldly. That is why Matteo tightened his grip on the buckle and looked at the trembling horse before him. This was no longer only mercy, it was an injustice begging for a witness. Matteo dropped part of his firewood so he could guide Lucero back along the road. Each step the horse took was slow and uncertain, as if the world beneath his hooves had turned into shadow. As they passed near town, a few people stopped to stare. "There goes Matteo," one man laughed. "So poor he now collects animals even the rich don't want." Matteo said nothing. He only tightened his hold on the rope and kept walking. When they reached his shack, Inez rushed outside, afraid something terrible had happened. But when she saw the blind horse, thin and covered in dust, her face softened. She did not ask what it would cost or what the neighbors would say. She stepped closer, placed a hand on his neck and whispered, "Poor creature." The children came out behind her, first afraid, then tender. That night there was little food, but for the first time in a long while, compassion was more than enough. Days passed, and Lucero began to stand with more strength. Matteo gave him clean water, fresh grass, and gentle words before leaving for the hills. The horse could not see, but he seemed to notice what others missed: the sound of certain footsteps, the shift of the wind, the scent of old leather. One afternoon, Matteo pulled out the golden falcon buckle. Lucero stiffened at once, then neighed toward the desert, as if something buried in his memory had just awakened. Before sunrise, Lucero began striking the ground with one hoof, restless, as if an old voice were calling him from the desert. Matteo woke with a start and found him facing the darkness, though his eyes could see nothing. "What are you trying to show me, friend?" he asked. The horse gave a low neigh, took a few steps, then turned his head as if waiting. Matteo felt fear, but also a strange certainty. Lucero was not trying to run. He was trying to remember. They walked for hours along an old path nearly erased by sand. Lucero moved slowly, but without hesitation, guided by scents, sounds, and memories Matteo could not understand. By late afternoon, they reached a cluster of massive rocks, and there the horse stopped before a stone shaped like a falcon. Then he scraped at the dry earth with his hooves. Matteo knelt, pushed the sand aside with his hands, and touched something buried, old fabric, hardened by years underground. He pulled carefully, and 2 torn sacks appeared, filled with dusty coins and pieces of gold. Matteo lost his breath, but before joy could reach him, he saw something that chilled his blood. Among the treasure was a small metal plate bearing a name that was not Don Baltazar's. This fortune did not look like a simple loss. It looked like a buried lie. Matteo slipped the plate into his pocket, never imagining that, from a distance, someone had already begun following his steps. Matteo had barely finished filling the first sack when Lucero lifted his head and neighed with force. It was not ordinary fear. It was a warning. Between the rocks appeared Don Baltazar and Roldan, his foreman, their eyes locked on the gold. "So the blind horse still remembered," Baltazar said. Matteo stepped back, shielding Lucero. Then he understood they had not followed him out of curiosity, but out of greed. Baltazar demanded the sacks, but Matteo pulled the metal plate from his pocket. "Your name is not on this," he said, his voice trembling. Roldan went pale. For years he had kept silent, but at the sight of that plate, he lowered his eyes and confessed that the fortune belonged to families Baltazar had deceived on old caravans. The merchant burned with fury. He did not want to recover a loss anymore. He wanted to bury the truth before it reached town. Baltazar lunged for the sack, but Lucero stepped between them, steady despite his blindness. The horse neighed toward the mountain, and a deep rumble answered beneath the stones. Sand began to fall from the falcon-shaped rock, as if the desert itself had awakened. Roldan ran, shouting that he would tell everything. Baltazar stood alone in the dust of his own lie. Matteo took the plate, released the gold, and understood the real test was not becoming rich, but choosing justice. Roldan reached town before nightfall and confessed everything before the families Baltazar had cheated for years. When Matteo returned with the plate, no one doubted the truth anymore. The gold was recovered and returned to its rightful owners, while Baltazar lost his caravans, his land, and the respect he had bought with fear. Matteo asked for no reward. He asked only that Lucero never again be treated as a thing without value. But the families did not forget his honesty. From the rightful share they recovered, they bought Matteo a small farm, tools, and a cart to carry firewood. For the first time, his children ate without counting crumbs, and Inez slept without fearing the next day. Lucero received food, rest, and affection. Though his eyes remained clouded, he walked the fields with a new certainty, because he no longer needed sight to know he was home. Years later, Matteo would tell that story beneath the same tree where Lucero rested among the children. He always said the horse had not led him to treasure, but to the kind of man he wanted to be. Baltazar had owned wealth and ended empty. Matteo had almost nothing, yet still shared his last water. The true blessing did not come when he found the gold, but when he refused to abandon the one the world had forgotten.